Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast, where we serve and support leaders so you can serve and support your local church.
Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast. Welcome to the end of September. I hope that your fall has been treating you well. So today I'm really excited because we are going to rebroadcast a conversation that I had with author and pastor Clay Scroggins. It was back from this summer, but I wanted to post it again for you all because it was such a powerful conversation that we had just about healthy leadership and how to be a healthy ministry leader and just some tips for accomplishing that. And guys, I'm so excited because Clay is going to be with us at the Overflow Worship Conference in less than 2 weeks. So after you listen to this podcast, run, don't walk, and get your tickets for the conference because there's only 2 weeks left. So if you want to be sure that you get a seat and be sure that you can join us, get over there to overflowworship.com and you'll be guided to all of the ticket checkout processes and everything. But you're going to be so blessed by this conversation today. So without anything further, let's listen one more time to my conversation with Clay Scroggins. I'm really thrilled and grateful to welcome Clay Scroggins to the podcast. Clay is the lead pastor of Buckhead Church in Atlanta, Georgia. He's also an author, which we're going to talk about his book today. And they live in Atlanta, him and his wife, Jenny, and their 5 children. So let's get right to it. Welcome, Clay. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Andrea. If you can go back and edit it and add like some Outcast as you're introducing me.
Yeah, sure.
That would be amazing.
I could do that.
As I'm kidding, or I'm serious. Either way, as an ATLian, glad to be joining you all the way from Atlanta.
Yeah, I was ready to hit pause and go back and start over. Well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it, and I would love it if you would just tell our listeners a little bit about you and where God has you today.
Sure. I have been married now for, my wife and I will celebrate 15 years this year. And I feel like whenever pastors brag on their spouse, I'm always like slightly suspicious, which is terrible. But she's genuinely my best friend, closest confidant. And I'm really such a better human because I have been with her. She and I have 5 kids together. So we've got a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old.
Wow.
And we love our church. We love what we get to do. This obviously has not been the easiest year to be a pastor, but I just feel like our church is the greatest church in the world. It's just in a really unique location where I'm staring at a Saks off Fifth and a Nordstrom Rack, TJ Maxx, DSW right across the street there. We're kind of right in it's like the business district of Atlanta. And we are really enjoying pastoring here. Great community of people, very diverse group of people at our church, and really grateful to get to talk about being a pastor and leading worship and trying to figure out how to help people know Jesus more, know his love more, and follow him more closely. Really, really excited about getting to have this conversation.
Yeah. Amen. Well, I'm excited to have it too. Thank you for being willing to do it. So a couple of years ago, or let's see, I'm trying to think when it was. It feels like it could have been a couple of years ago, but it probably was last year. I think it was last summer.
It feels like forever ago. It feels
like, I don't know, 10 years ago.
At the same time.
Yeah. It was 2020. It was last summer. But I was reading your book, How to Lead in a World of Distraction. And I just took away so many amazing concepts and just so many applicable things that I could take and, apply into my life. And, I remember, telling my husband about it and saying, okay, you have to read this book. So then he reads the book. And now, anytime I have an intern come through the Overflow Worship internship program, I'm like, here you go. You need to read this book. It's required reading because it's so good. And I would love it if we could talk a little bit about that book today and just how, it applies to the people that we're talking to and, pastors and worship leaders and even volunteers. And so would you take everybody through maybe just a little synopsis of the premise of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, Andrea, this is a weird thing to say, but if I could go back and retitle the book, I would, because that word distraction is such a big word in the title. It's very, that word really grabs, it's the attention grabber. And the book is about distractions, but it's really about the cost of distraction. It's really about what's on the other side of distraction. It's really about pursuing health in our emotional life and how the greatest obstacle to our emotional health is really are the distractions that we have control over. So it's really not about distractions that we fall victim to, but it's more about distractions that we keep our fingers on the dial of and turn up and down to avoid having to deal with those things that are inside of us. The greatest way that you and I can grow as leaders, and my definition of leadership is real simple. I believe leadership is influence. And no matter where you are today, you're a leader. Whether you're a stay-at-home parent, whether you're a pastor of a church, whether you're a summer intern, God has put you in the position you're in to influence the people around you. And you don't need a title for that. You don't need a parking space for that. You don't need an office for that. It's wired in your DNA. And so I believe leadership is in every single one of us. And to grow as a leader, we have to become the most emotionally healthy version of ourselves. The best leaders are the most emotionally healthy leaders. And the greatest detriment to our emotional health are the distractions that we turn up and down that keep us from avoiding having to deal with those things that are inside of us that we really most days would just rather not deal with. But as we learn to deal with them, we really are setting ourselves up to grow in the best ways possible so that we can ultimately be the best version of ourselves, so that we can love others as best as possible, so that we can follow Jesus as well as we possibly can.
Yeah. Yes. So you talked about the distractions that we can control, right? And so in your experience and kind of in your conversations and maybe in your own life, what are some of those that you feel like you see consistently, common thread for pastors, people in ministry that are distractions they could control?
Yeah, that's a great question to contextualize it specifically to pastors. I mean, the general ones it's no surprise to anyone. If I were to just ask you, well, what did you do today to distract yourself? I mean, it's probably some game that you're playing on your phone. It's probably your email. It's your social media. It's, online shopping. It's texting with friends, whatever. I mean, so much of it is technology. Technology is the greatest culprit probably. And this book, it really is amazing too, just as people, I've just noticed over and over again, it's so common that when people think of distractions, they immediately go to technology naturally, because I think it is, it's it's a new battle that we're facing in our generation of trying to figure out, what do I do? How do I consume technology in the healthiest way possible? How do I live a healthy, sustainable life with the technology that I've been given? But to your question though, there are some specific distractions that leaders use. And I'm thinking specifically, as you mentioned, those of us who are working in ministry. Yeah, one of the ones for me that I use more times than not is the distraction of progress, of having to feel like that I'm always moving things forward. I've learned that I have a hard time with any meeting that feels like I'm going backwards, or any meeting that I feel like I'm just staying still in, that I'm just addicted to progress. The distraction of success is also really dangerous for leaders. We love the perception of success, sometimes more than the actual reality of success. I mean, so many of us would rather be seen as successful than actually be successful. And that's a distraction. It keeps us from having to pay attention to those things inside of us that might even make us feel like we're not being as successful as we want to be. And then one of the most common ones for people in the church world is the distraction of certainty, of that feeling that I've got to have it all together. I've got to have it figured out. I've got to put on the show that I know what I'm doing. And we've seen that a lot during COVID. That I feel like there's been a big separation of leaders that feel, for one, no one knows what they're doing. No one has a clue what they're doing. I mean, none of us, there's no playbook for this. It's the first time any of us have ever been through this.
Yeah.
And the leaders that have just come out of the gate feeling like, oh, we know exactly what needs to happen. We know exactly where we need to be and what we need to be doing. I think everybody around is just like, I'm not buying it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's just a distraction. It's just something that we use to turn up so that we don't have to deal with those things that are inside of us, because maybe we can't face the reality that I don't know what I'm doing, or maybe we can't face the reality that the future is uncertain. There's many reasons why we use that distraction, but those are the three that I think are, at least in my life, that I see most in ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you say distraction of certainty, it also makes me think of something that I've seen is a distraction of comparison, and kind of like within this season, especially of like, well, we don't, maybe a church doesn't have budget or personnel for much.
An online pastor or the technology or whatever.
Exactly. Yes. And that can become all consuming, because then it's like, oh, well, our church might die if we don't, step into this. And so how, I think people are asking, how do we navigate through that? So let's move on to that and ask that question. So these distractions that you just listed are a reality. So what are some practical steps that people in ministry that we could take to help us navigate through them?
Well, let's take comparison, because you brought that up, Andrea. I love that. We're freewheeling at this point. We're really into the conversation, which I personally enjoy. You think about comparison. If we were to get underneath that, if we were to force ourselves to ask the question to go, okay, why do I need to feel like I am better than the pastor across the town or the worship leader on the other side of the stage? What is in me that feels like if that person has written a better song, has a better voice, performs better, is in better shape, whatever, what does that say about me? Well, okay, if we get under that and then we go, well, maybe it makes me feel threatened, or maybe it makes me feel like that I don't have what it takes, or that I don't measure up. Maybe it's going to make me feel superior to someone else, or maybe it's going to make me feel inadequate to someone else. But here's why this is so important, because for you to be the best leader possible, getting underneath that comparison thing that we turn up and down to make ourselves feel better or feel worse about ourselves, it will only help us be a better human to figure out, why do I do that? Why do I lean toward that? Why am I tempted to take the bait of comparison? And what does that say about me? What does that say about my soul? And more important than that, even, what would God want to say to that? If he were going to speak right into that and go, hey, next time you feel tempted to turn up the dial and to, grab your phone and look on Instagram to compare yourself to someone else, negatively or positively, what if you were to just pause, which is a huge word. I feel like that's one of the greatest leadership words, is the word pause, to just go, hang on, pause for 1 second. What does God have to say about you? Like, what does your heavenly Father think about that person, and what does he think about you? And now let's determine then if the behavior you're about to embark upon is worth doing or not. Because what I've found is that most of the things that we use to distract ourselves, they don't really have positive or negative value. That they're really just, the value of them is really determined by how we use them. So social media is a great example of that. Is social media a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it depends on how you use it. You can use it for good, and you can use it to destroy your soul. But asking that question, okay, what does my heavenly Father, what does he want to say? What does he want to do? How does he want to fight with me to shape my soul and shape my identity into the closest version of the one that he made me to be, the most loved version of myself. I think that's ultimately the goal, but you just can't get there. You will never get there if you constantly just turn up the dial, more and more noise, more and more volume, louder and louder. And eventually we just miss out on the growth that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. I think it reminds me of in the book talking about when you talk about figure out your why. And I know the context was different, but it's a similar idea that we got to figure out the why behind what's going on in this kind of surface space. And it is a lot easier just to kind of ignore it and stay on the surface and not dig down, because sometimes we are maybe afraid of what we're going to find or afraid of what God's going to say or ask us to do or ask us to surrender. But, like you're saying, there's so much beauty in it too, because it gets us to a healthier version of ourselves, which is, ultimately what God wants for us.
Well, to your point, Andrea, if you don't figure out your why, here's 4 habits, 4 rhythms that you got to put in place to stay in a healthy place, to be trending toward health. Health is not a destination. You never get to the point where you're like, okay, I did it, I'm healthy. Yeah. Right. I mean, it's amazing how I'm 41 years old. There are things that are in my soul that need my attention that I feel like I thought I matured past this. I thought I figured this out in my 20s, and here I am 41 still dealing with it. But that's the way health is. You never arrive at physical health. I mean, it's something that you constantly have to monitor and pay attention to, but the same thing is true of our emotional health. And so these 4 habits, that one that you referenced, the idea of finding your why, of really trying to simplify your life to the essence of why am I doing what I'm doing. If you don't do it, if you don't determine why you're on a stage, why you're in the role you're in, why you're leading the way that you're leading, you're opening up the door for someone else to do that for you. Someone else will determine why you're doing it. Someone else will determine how to measure your success. And I think that's when we find ourselves on that hamster wheel, that rat race that is so easy to run, where it's just, I got to get on a bigger stage. I got to get on a bigger, I need the affection and adoration, the applause of more people and more people and more people, versus being able to step back and go, you know what? If people like it, great. If they don't like it, great. But success for me is faithfulness. Success is, have I been faithful? Is my Father in heaven proud of the work that I've done today? And if that's the goal, if that's what we're aiming for, if that's our why, then I think that's one of the habits that we use to turn down those the critics and also the fans, which are both just as dangerous to our soul.
Did you know that we also have a conference? The Overflow Worship Conference is on October 8th and 9th, 2021 in Wilmer, Minnesota. Our goal is to serve and support the entire worship team. This year, we'll be joined by pastor and author Clay Scroggins, worship leader and writer of Peace Be Still, Hope Dust, Overflow Worship founder Andrea Olson, and more. Our goal is to give you and your whole team a break, a moment to pause and be refreshed. You can learn more at www.overflowworship.com.
I've found that, when you talk about pause and, taking the time to figure out the why, it's so hard to do. It's so hard to make the time. It's so hard to figure out how to do that. But I've found that, there's little things we can do each day, but then there's also power in, taking a chunk of time, whether it's a day or a few hours or a retreat if you can, or, whatever the case may be, to do that. Because I know for me, if, we purpose to take time away, it takes me a good day, maybe even
just to silence all the noise that's already around you. Yeah, exactly.
Just to stop, thinking about what I'm missing or what I forgot, or, what fire I need to put out. So it's good for our hearts and our souls to do that, to give ourselves the space to get to ask those questions. And I love what you said about asking God, am I being faithful? Because that's something that, man, I don't ever want to forget that. I don't ever want to forget to go through my days and let that be the main thing, because there are so many things that try to take my focus and become my main thing. And they feel like good things, right? In ministry. It's like,
hey, Andrea, that is a profound thought and I think it's the allure of ministry, is that they are good things. Oftentimes ministry is the greatest distraction for pastors, for people that work in church world, is that it's just another crisis, another fire to put out, another person to pray with, another person to have a conversation with. And we ultimately can run ourselves ragged, leaving ourselves in a place where we're the least healthy one, which none of us ever set out to do, but I think can easily happen if we don't do that very thing that you talked about, carving out some space to determine why I'm doing this, carving out some space to get in a more mindful position to be able to talk to and commune with God. I like the idea of clearing off the antennas, or for those of you that are children of the 80s, that concept of blowing in the Nintendo game, to get the dust out of there so that you can clears up the fuzz on the screen. I think that's what this does, is it opens up God doesn't need us to open up the channels of communication with him. Jesus opened up those channels when he paid the ultimate price on the cross and defeated death through his resurrection. But too often the static of our distraction keeps us in a place where we're not able to hear him. And I've just learned he's not going to turn it down. Usually he doesn't turn it down for us. Now, you might be in a season where, 2020 was a season where the noise was turned down for all of us in different ways, but and maybe you're in a season of joblessness, or maybe you're in a season of loneliness, or maybe you're in a season where you're maybe not in a relationship right now. But in general, what I found is that God doesn't compete with our noise. He lets that noise persist until we're willing and ready to turn it down. And then we find out that God has this reciprocal nature to him, that as we draw near to him, he draws near to us. As we return to him, he returns to us. As we call out to him, that's when we find him. And so that's the beauty of the way he works, that if we'll make the effort, if we'll put in the effort, if we'll put it on the top of the list, that's usually when we find him.
Yeah. Amen. And I know for me, it's a daily thing. Like you were saying, I wish that it wasn't. I wish that, I was just so easy all the time. Because like you said, it's like, didn't I figure this out but it's a daily surrender and a daily, things that I have to do to put them in place. And I even have like reminders that I have constantly repeated on my phone, and I never will delete them because it pops up every day at such and such time. And some days it's like, oh yeah, I was there already. And other days I'm like, yep, I needed that. And so it's those things that, just that daily reminder of, okay, how am I going to be faithful today? How am I going to put him at the top of my list? And this, quieting the white noise, as you talk about in the book, turning down the noise. How can we do that? So I just love that. So as
Andrea, can I ask you one question?
Yeah, absolutely.
How old are your kids?
They are 10, 6.5, and almost 4.
Okay. Have y'all watched A Week Away yet?
Yes. I just with my oldest, but yes, she's singing all the songs. And
isn't that crazy? Were those songs of your childhood or teenage years?
They were. Yes.
It's bizarre. If you haven't seen A Week Away, and if you're a single person or newly married, or your kids are out of the house, I don't know if I would recommend this movie to you, but if you have anywhere from 10, 11, 12-year-old to teenagers, you got to watch this movie. And it's just about a week at camp. But what's amazing is they take these songs like Stephen Curtis Chapman, Great Adventure, Michael W. Smith, Place in This World, Amy Grant, Baby, 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 yes. And they kind of modernize them, I would say. But it's been so crazy to listen to my kids singing, saddle up your horses. Yes. I'm like, what is going on?
I know.
But as you were talking, I thought of this. There's this Stephen Curtis Chapman song, it was one of his early cuts. It was called The Mountain, where he says, I want to live up on this mountain And the idea of the song is that, of course, we want to live in a place where, it's a little bit of that camp thing where when you're away at camp, I think of camp as like it's like an arboretum where the everything you need is perfectly dialed in for something to grow. I mean, you've got distractions are turned down. You're there for a week. It's with your closest friends, whatever. There's a worship leader, speaker, all this stuff that everything's just right so that you can grow. And of course we would want to live there where we don't have the distractions of everyday life. But as Stephen Curtis Chapman reminded us back in the early 90s, that's just not life. Life is filled with distractions that come at us, but also distractions that we unfortunately choose that will keep us from turning down the noise if we don't pay attention to it. So anyway, that was a real random rabbit trail that included a lot of 90s CCM and also a current Netflix production.
Yes, so good. And it's funny because along the lines of that movie, my daughter was like, "Hey, Mom, have you ever heard this song? Our God is an awesome God." I was like,
heard it.
Yes, honey, I have. And then I was like, I'm a failure. You didn't know that song?
Exactly. How do you not know that I would know that song?
I know. But she just thought she was coming at me with all these brand new songs that were so cool. So
you're like, oh, you've got so much to learn.
I know it.
Padawan.
Yes, exactly. But it was a great analogy, though. You're exactly right. It was really good. And it was fun to chat about the current Netflix latest flicks too.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Well, as we wrap up, Clay, do you have any last words of encouragement for our listeners, pastors, worship leaders, kind of coming out of this current crisis season as things are sort of normalizing, maybe opening up again? Just it's so different all across the board. It's different in Minnesota than it is in California, than it is in Georgia. But do you have anything that the Lord's been laying on your heart, teaching you, that would be an encouragement for our listeners?
Yeah, I would just say we have just been through, in some ways, still going through it, but it feels like there's light at the end of the tunnel. But what we have been through was trauma. It was a traumatic experience. And we did this at the end of 2020 with our staff, where we just sat around in a circle and we just named everything that we lost last year. And oftentimes the place that we want to distract ourselves from is usually the place of greatest emotional pain. And whenever there's loss, there's emotional pain, and learning to grieve what we've lost is such an important thing. So, even though it's we're well into 2021, I think it's worth taking some time, if you haven't done this already, to sit around with some friends, whoever your community is, and just name the things that you've lost over the last year. Some of you weren't able to go on an anniversary trip, or some of you celebrated a big milestone birthday that you really didn't get to have the celebration that you wanted to have. Some of maybe your kid didn't get to have the graduation party that you wanted to have. Maybe you have a child with a wedding, or maybe a sister with a wedding that didn't get to have the wedding she wanted. Maybe you didn't have the wedding you wanted, or maybe, God forbid, you had a family member that got sick and spent time in the hospital, or maybe there was job loss, or maybe financial loss, or maybe someone in your family died. I think learning to grieve that, learning to state the loss, and then learning to turn down the noise low enough and long enough to be able to deal with that emotion, to be able to admit it, to say it, to speak it. I think it's the gift, it's the tool that God's given us to be able to unlock and release some of the power of the pain, is to just say it. And as you say it, to be able to invite God into that space, to say, hey, would you come and fill the space? Would you come and fill this void? Would you come and make up for this loss? He's a God of more. He's a God of abundance. He's a God of anything's possible, and he's a God of the unimaginable. And there's no reason why he wouldn't say, hey, as hard as that loss was, I'm going to come and make it right. I'm going to come and bring beauty from the ashes. I'm going to bring life from the death. I'm going to bring something beautiful from that hardship. So I would just invite everybody who's listening today to find some time to do that. It's never going to be urgent. You're never gonna, it's never gonna pop up on your calendar unless you put it on your calendar. But it might be one of the most important things that we can do as we get to a healthy space to be able to continue to grow as followers of Jesus.
Wow, that is so good. Thank you so much for sharing that and for that challenge. And for all of you listening, I encourage you, like Clay just said, make the time. I know that I'm going to, and I encourage you all to do the same. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Clay. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Glad to do it. Thanks, Andrew.
You've been listening to the Overflow Worship Podcast. If you enjoy our podcast, please take a moment and leave us a 5-star rating and a written review, which helps us reach more people. New episodes are released every other Monday. So until next time, thank you for listening.